I'd like to welcome each and every one of you here today to the State House. Today, we are here, the committee are here, we're ordinary citizens that have answered the call to public service. We're ordinary people like you, other than we've been entrusted with a policy-making position for the state of Alabama. We are here today to hear what you have to say. What you have to say is important. It's important to us. You have a right to have input into your government, and we thank you for taking time to be here. As a reminder, please recall that there are three branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and judicial. We are the legislative branch. We are given very limited powers by the Constitution. We are to appropriate funds and to set policy for our state by passing laws. When we're out of session, we have no authority other than talking, which is what we're here to, listening, which is what we're here to do today. We have no authority to manage the day-to-day affairs of any department in state government. That is the duty of the executive branch. Our meeting today, and I mentioned that we pass laws and set the budgets. Our meeting today is the result of one of these such laws. Representative England saw a need for the legislature to have more oversight of the Department of Corrections and for us to hear from you all directly. He introduced a bill, and it was approved unanimously by both the House and the Senate. Not one legislator voted against us doing what we're doing today. Every legislator was in favor of it. So as a result of that law, that bill that was passed, we're here today to listen to you, the citizens of Alabama. This is how our system works. Sometimes it's frustrating. I get frustrated. I'm sure you do. But without a doubt, it's the best system in the world, and I personally wouldn't change it with any other system. As we get started with your input in a moment, I ask that you not mention specific names of those that are incarcerated or have been for their safety, for their so there's no retribution. If you do, I can't stop you. I just suggest that you think through that before you mention those names. Please know that the very last person on our list, we have 20 people that have signed up to speak to us today. The very last person on that list is just important for us to hear from as the very first person. So for us to get through all of those who are scheduled to speak to us, it's obviously going to take quite a bit of time. That's okay. But we want everyone to be considerate of those who come after you so that we make sure that we can hear from everybody. We'll keep time. Gail and I will right here. And when you have, each person will have 3 minutes to address us. I know that doesn't sound like long, but by the time you multiply it out, it will be here for a while. When you have 10 seconds left, I'm going to give you this sign telling you 10 seconds. If you will, please wrap up what you're saying in those last 10 seconds and then end at that 3-minute mark. That's not to be punitive on anybody and what they say, but it is to allow time for everybody to have a say. I've heard from many of you, and I know that there are raw emotions that will likely come out today, and that's okay. We're here to hear what you have to say. If you get emotional, we'll be patient. Don't worry. What we can't deal with is emotions to get out of control and unchecked and go toward aggression or anything like that. So before any of that happens, heaven forbid, hopefully it won't, but if it does, here's what I, as chair, plan to do. I will attempt to calm and help adjust behavior so that it's acceptable from the chair. If the escalation continues beyond that, I will ask security to approach you to help you understand that this is serious and we need to calm down and stay in check. If that is not successful, we will recess the meeting and the committee will leave. Once that is settled, we'll come back, and if it happens again, we will recess the meeting, we will move to a different location, and only those who are speaking to us on this list will be allowed to come to that, plus the media. That's not to be punitive, but we have to have an orderly meeting so that everyone can have their say. Please know that I don't want to do any of that. I hope that's wasted breath, and I see some nods out there and some smiles, so I hope that's wasted breath. I reiterate that we are here to listen, we're here to learn, and hopefully make things better. We cannot do that if emotion turns into aggression. So with that, we will proceed with the meeting. And I will call each speaker. I would ask that, I'll tell you what, I will call the speaker, and I will also, while that speaker is coming to the mic, I will announce who the next speaker is. So if I announce you as being the next speaker, please come to the front row and be ready so that we don't have a lengthy delay every time we change speakers. So the first speaker is going to be Sarah DeArmond, if I said that right. So if Sarah DeArmond is here, please approach. Okay, I don't see anyone coming at this point. We'll move on to Nicole Simmons. Nicole Simmons. Okay, we'll move on to Megan Lyle. Megan Lyle. Okay, we'll move on to Elaine Bertishaw.
It was actually supposed to be Carla Crowder.
Okay, Ms. Crowder. Okay, as Ms. Crowder is coming, Cindy Hamilton will be the next speaker. Is Cindy Hamilton here? Okay, she's already on the front row. Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Crowder.
Thank you. My name is Carla Crowder. I'm Executive Director at Alabama Appleseed. I'm also a lawyer. We represent incarcerated people. We correspond with hundreds of incarcerated people, and I have visited most every prison in the state in the last decade. Appleseed provides research and policy advocacy on tough issues. I think we can all agree what's happening in our prisons qualifies, so I want to thank you first for your service on this committee. We have recently documented that mortality in ADOC is 5 times the national average. I will be providing documentation of mortality, assaults, staff assaults, in email correspondence that was recommended. I'd like to talk specifically about one of those deaths, Daniel Terry Williams, whose death has been reported across the national media and in 4 continents. This was a preventable death. He was beaten in October at Staten and died in November. It was not overcrowding or buildings or low staff that created the culture of violence and incompetence that led to Mr. Williams' death. I want to tell you what led to his death. The 38-year-old suspect in this kidnapping, rape, and torture was involved in 9 instances of sex assault, rape, and stabbing since 2017 in DOC while incarcerated. There is no documentation that he was placed in segregation for any of these assaults. There was no disciplinary action by ADOC. His classification summary showed a 5-year clear record of institutional violence, which resulted in a perfect score of 0 in risk assessment conducted in October of this year, and a total score low enough for him to be placed in medium security in an open bay dorm. The psych associates signed off on this and the warden signed off on this. 9 days later, 22-year-old Daniel Williams, who was scheduled to be released to his family within days, was found, according to ADOC, quote, unresponsive on this inmate's assigned bed. It appears that victim had been assaulted. Mr. Williams later died, and the Staten warden told the family he overdosed. This assailant was suspected but never charged, never disciplined, and not housed in segregation, even though 9 reports of sex assault are on his record. It happened at Donaldson, Fountain, Limestone, Bibb, and Bullock. I will be emailing committee members a detailed report and supporting evidence of what happened here. It's hard to even begin to suggest remedies sufficient to correct this kind of unconscionable neglect and incompetence. At a minimum, it appears that additional oversight of ADOC is warranted. Appleseed is working with national experts on an oversight bill to be introduced next session. We are here, sir. We are here to suggest reasonable, pragmatic, bipartisan responses. I hope you will consider the oversight bill, and I hope you also will consider visiting the prisons. There is provision in DOC policies for unannounced legislative visits at prisons. I would encourage you all to do so. This death could have been prevented. You can prevent hundreds more. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Crowder. Okay, Ms. Cindy Hamilton, and then the next speaker will be Pam Moser. Is Pam Moser here? Okay. All right, Ms. Hamilton.
There's no way I can follow that, but I will say my son has been mentally and physically tortured for 4 years. And in January of this year, corrupt officers, they are corrupt. They're on the news, hiding their identity, admitting they're all corrupt. We're given the authority to punish and take good time away. My son is not violent. He has no violent charges, and he was going to EOS in April, which is just 4 months away. All of his good time it was taken for, I'll tell you, phone violations. One was because he borrowed another inmate's PIN number. I have his story, and I'm going to give you guys a copy, and I think I emailed y'all all a copy too. But 700, and this was like 6 weeks after the executive order was signed. Do y'all know how many inmates' good time have been taken since then? Because it's a lot. That's also contributing to the numbers. And now his date says February of 2035. And it took less than 72 hours for his custody level to change. But then you have other ATLs. They never get changed. It's all wrong. Y'all, these are our sons on these videos and these pictures. They're our sons. They're our brothers, our fathers, our uncles, our neighbors. They're our family, our husbands. There's husbands in there, and not all of them have killed someone. It's not right. You're not protecting them, and there's no medical care. None. Did y'all see there's 94 positions open for Yes Care throughout Alabama? Have y'all seen that? So it's not okay. Two wrongs do not make a right, and what the state is allowing to happen is it's animalistic, and it's our family. This is my son. And it's not just him. There's a lot of these guys struggled with addiction. That's what led them to prison. So when putting an addict into an environment where there's copious amounts of drugs, it's never going to be, and there's no way to get away from it. Even if they wanted to, they can't. And this is not normal drugs. This is a new drug, fentanyl. It's never going to work out. It's not okay. It's just not okay. Where's the rehabilitation? We have to have that.
Ms. Hamilton, your time has expired. Thank you so much for being here today and addressing this Representative England. Sure.
Ma'am, if you could come back for a second.
Ms. Hamilton.
Ms. Hamilton?
Ms. Hamilton. Representative England would like to ask you a question.
Okay.
Just stay there at the mic.
Have you reported any of this to anybody at Department of Corrections?
They don't care. Yes.
I
They don't
bet.
care. My son was assaulted in Limestone last July, and it took 6 days to get him out of general population. They don't care.
And I'm not going to
I know.
ask you to identify him or anything like that, but I just wanted to make sure that. And
They don't
if
care.
if you're coming to,
They know. They don't care.
and I just wanted, if you're coming to kind of anybody, and Mr. Chair, I just wanted, in your narrative, could you make sure to tell us if you've notified Department of Corrections of what's going on, so we can have a good idea of what if
I
something
made
that's
you all a
something that we
copy.
need to talk about.
I made you all a copy.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Simpson.
Ms. Hamilton, I do want to say I did receive your email.
Okay.
Thank you very much for sending this information to us, and I think that's part of our role in this job is to hear from victims, not only in this meeting setting, but as you have stories that go through. So I do want you to understand that your email was received and it was read, so thank you for.
I didn't even want to make today about my son because I realized really fast it's about all of our sons. And it's not just my son. And it's not okay. Like, y'all don't understand. Like, and then when we first got here, you said, there's nothing you can do about it, da-da-da. Okay, well, then that's the person I need to talk, because it needs to be fixed, like, right now, today. Like, right now, yesterday. They're killing them. They're torturing them. It's not okay. It's just not okay. It's not okay. They have to fix it. And I actually attended the first meeting. I don't know if you guys remember, up on the top. And I didn't know. But Commissioner Ham, I was really expecting him to be here because I have some questions for him because he lied. You outright asked him, are we housing them as with classifications, crimes, whatever, and he told you yes, but that's a lie. Not only that, classifications it needs to be completely restructured because according to, like my son, he literally could go to a level 5 prison right now, and there's not a violent bone in his body.
Ms. Hamilton, before you leave, if you will notice there on the podium, there are contact for victim notification issues.
Okay.
If you will take that and use that those contacts as well.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
before you leave,
Singleton.
I'd like to ask a question. Will you please come back to
Ms.
this?
Hamilton.
Ms. Hamilton, you talked about the good time that was taken away,
Yes.
and he was going to be up for parole in what year?
No, it's not parole.
mean-
He would have EOS'd. He was on
EOS, I'm
15
sorry.
straight. He would EOS. He would 4 years in April. He was supposed to come home in this coming April, which he has no violent crimes. He could have already been out. He could be out now with the monitoring. But now it is February of 2035,
So EOS would have been 2024.
April of 2024,
Now we're talking about,
February of 2035.
thank you. That's why I want to get some clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we have Ms. Moser, and the next one on the list is Lauren Ferrano. Is Lauren? Okay, Lauren's here. Okay, Ms. Moser.
My name is Pam Moser. I am from Birmingham, Alabama. I am a nurse. My son, Brian, died at Staten Infirmary on October the 4th, 2023. He was 46 years old. Around puberty, Brian began to suffer with depression and later diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It was during this time he began abusing substances. Brian's father and I went for visitation at Bullock on August the 19th, 2023, as we did every month. Brian had called a few days earlier and said he had been hurt. The left side of Brian's face was swollen and discolored. He had an open stab wound on his left calf, which was red and swollen. I counted 5 lacerations on his head. I asked the CO if he knew anything about Brian's injury. He said, Brian tends to provoke people. I had to send him back to change his pants because they had blood all over them. 4 days later, long enough for sepsis to set in, Brian was finally hospitalized with a skull fracture, facial fracture, rib fractures, a stab wound, and teeth knocked out. Warden Lamar said no report had been filed and stated, "I don't know how we let Brian get by us." Brian was hospitalized again on September 13th. On September 23rd, the hospital physician requested the family come see Brian as he wasn't doing well. As Brian did not want resuscitative measures performed, he was put on comfort care. Warden Baber stopped our visitation, stating that Brian is doing better. He was placed on comfort care. I explained to her that meant they were withdrawing aggressive treatment, that he was dying. Warden Baber said, "We're all dying." We were not allowed to see Brian the last 7 days of his life. We called daily to tell him we loved him and were trying to get a visit. We don't know if he got any of those messages, and if he did, was there any response? When Warden Calloway called to tell me my son had died, I asked if I could talk to anyone that was with him the last few hours of his life, but was denied that request. Hundreds of families in Alabama are suffering like this because of the state's failure to correct its flawed prison system. When one breaks the law, they lose their freedom, not their rights as human beings. My calling as a nurse was hospice care. ADOC took away the chance for me to be with my son during his last days and hours. How is it justified not to be allowed to be with your child as he takes his last breaths? This is what I believe. Gangs control Alabama prisons and sell drugs to the incarcerated addicts that are in the throes of their addiction. They must get those drugs from staff members because visitors and mail are checked. Therefore, those staff members must look the other way when gangs exact their vengeance on those unable to pay until they are beaten senseless. Therefore, no report is filed. Thank you for listening to me, and I will also email another version.
Thank you, Ms. Moser. And I would like to state that I too have received a lot of those emails. I've read every single one. We'll continue to read and look over those in addition to whatever else is sent. So thank you. Okay. Ms. Farino. And the next speaker will be Kevin Hyatt. Is Kevin Hyatt? Okay. All right. Ms. Farino, am I saying that?
You are, yes. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Farino, and I am counsel in a case that was filed yesterday on behalf of currently and formerly incarcerated individuals, 2 labor unions, and the Woods Foundation. The lawsuit challenges forced labor practices and the unconstitutional and racist operation of the Alabama Parole Board. We hear phrases like modern-day slavery and the new Jim Crow all the time, but let's talk about what that means on the ground here in our home state of Alabama. Over 90% of parole-eligible applicants are denied. For individuals who are in the prison system, if they either refuse to work or need to take time away from work, even for an illness, they are threatened with punishment, losing their good time, and being put back behind the wall if they're at a work release center. Meanwhile, this morning, thousands of Alabamians woke up in prisons, colloquially called work centers, and dressed in normal clothing, reported to their jobs at Burger King, KFC, McDonald's, meat processing plants, and manufacturing plants. One of them could have handed you your morning coffee this morning. Another group of incarcerated workers will be laboring today for the city of Montgomery, wearing hazard vests as they pick up trash along the highway. Some of them work in the very building where we are right now. Those individuals are paid $2 for a full day of work. That is the same rate from 1927. Others are behind high security gates, and they are paid nothing for their labor, and yet they are handed keys and given incredible amount of responsibility throughout the facilities. In fact, they are filling the correctional positions that Commissioner Ham cannot fill. These people are the same ones who are being denied parole, the ones we trust to run and operate the prisons. They are running the healthcare units, they are running the dorms, they are providing maintenance, they are even building the execution chamber that will be used to kill their fellow prisoners. Attorney General Steve Marshall and Parole Chair Lee Guathny will tell the public that there are no nonviolent people who can be safely paroled. They tell us that in order to keep the public safe, they must keep these people locked away. The data shows us that this is simply and unequivocally not true. The parole board defies this legislature day in and day out by not following their own standards. In fact, parole applicants who are low risk are less likely to be paroled than medium risk applicants. Why? One has to wonder if it's because those low risk individuals are driving Alabama's economy. If DOC were an $800 million corporation, as Commissioner Ham described it under oath last week, the shareholders would have ousted the entire leadership team years ago. Through this lawsuit, we prove that from the top to the bottom, Alabama's so-called correctional system is devoting itself full-time to coercion and exploitation on top of trapping people in cruel and inhumane conditions with no possible exit ramp. We are asking for you all to come to the table. We will happily open up our records that we have gathered from public documents to show you that this is a clear story of profit over people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farino. Question from Representative England.
All right, thank you. I don't have enough time in the day to have a conversation about the parole system and what happens as a result of it. But I think there are certain things that need to be kind of reiterated, one of which is something that you pointed out, that the lower the risk you are, the less likely you are to be paroled as compared to individuals that are medium and at high risk, right? They will tell the same person that you are a risk to public safety and then send that same person off site for 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day to work. They will also tell the same person that despite some of those employers coming before the parole board and many others writing letters saying that I would hire this person as soon as they got out, that you are dangerous, right? But you pointed out there was a racial disparity there. Can you imagine what the workforce looks like if the racial disparity that you talk about, and I've seen the numbers, exists? It's primarily black male. And they work alongside people that make double what they make. But it also persists within the system too, because oftentimes those same black males that are denied parole, who are dangerous, according to the parole board, they often get the same sort of menial jobs as compared to their white counterparts. The system itself appears to be so dependent on exploitation and racism that it could not survive without it. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Representative England, when I was preparing my remarks, I had the word racist at the beginning of my speech to describe the parole board, and multiple people told me that that word makes Alabamians uncomfortable and I should take it out. But the numbers don't lie. Black individuals are twice as likely to be denied parole as white individuals. That is what happens when we take away objective standards that this legislature determined was a successful way of figuring out who is safe for release and who is not. The parole board is ignoring their own guidance in over 80% of cases.
Well, and you know, again, I can't, you know, like I said, we could talk about this all day, but I think what's really, what really bothers me is that the Department of Corrections takes 40% of the earnings ostensibly to pay for housing that is unconstitutionally inhumane.
Yeah. Yep.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And we're not talking about covering the costs of incarceration. We're talking about Alabama profiting to the tune of $500 million based off of this forced labor scheme.
And listen, you know, the way we set this up, I was here in 2019, and when the bill was passed, the parole board has complete and utter discretion, right? So really only a group of people with one common theme, the chair, that's been there since 2019, when you can actually use the numbers and trace it up until this point, has been the common denominator amongst all the issues that we have seen within the department, within the parole board, which plays out in the Department of Corrections. And I think one has to ask the question, as you said, if the least dangerous individuals based upon risk assessments are the ones that are least likely to get parole, either the Department of Corrections doesn't have a clue how to assess people, or there's another purpose.
When you have a chair that says on the record, I am not driven by data, you have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farano.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Singleton.
before you leave, Ms. Brown,
Ms. Farano.
I understand you filed the lawsuit, and that if you would tell us today, based on what you just talked about and expound, what will you see as the remedy if you had to ask this committee for a remedy?
There are a number of things which are outlined in the lawsuit and which will be in forthcoming filings related to the lawsuit. I think I'll hold specifics, but I will say everyone in this room has solutions that we have tried to bring to DOC, that we have tried to bring to the governor's office and the attorney general's office. And we are met with closed doors at every turn. This includes former corrections officers. This includes families who are impacted. This includes researchers who have been in this area for their entire lives. And so the idea that we are trying our best is simply not true. If we are trying our best, why are we 50th in everything? Or actually in the prisons, we're first in everything, right? We have the highest homicide rate. We have the highest suicide rate. We have the highest overdose rate. We had over 260 deaths this year and last year. We keep outpacing ourselves in violence and cruelty. And this lawsuit will seek to end the profit motive that drives this prison system so that we get back to the mission of rehabilitation. These people are going to be our neighbors. Do we want people to come out at the other end 10 times worse than they went in? Because that's exactly what's happening right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, up now is Kevin Hyatt. Up next will be Michaela Martin. So Michaela Martin. Okay, I see you. Okay, Mr. Hyatt, Kevin Hyatt.
Yes, sir. I'm going to let y'all know what brought me up to this podium this morning. 2 months ago, my nephew, Lewis Christopher Latham, was beat to death in Ventress. He was beat to death. It's a reoccurring theme that you keep hearing. The inmate who did it, I'm not going to write their name. He was classified as a level 5 security. He was in an open dormitory. He has a release date of 9/9/99. He had no business, and this is what I've talked to a lot of other people who have the same problem. The classification system that the ADOC uses, I don't know where they got it from. I don't know if they opened up excuse me for being sarcastic, a box of Cracker Jack, because they're just sticking inmates wherever there's an open bed. We got the call 4 days after my nephew was beat to death that he's in the hospital. He was life-flighted out of Ventress. And when we get to the hospital, he's hooked up to machines Doctor comes in, gives us the prognosis of he's brain dead. And over for what? Christopher was in there for a robbery. He got a 21-year sentence for that robbery. He had already done 18 years on it. We had to elect to take him off life support, which you know what happens next, guys. But the purpose of this place today, other than just hearing us tell our stories, guys, you got to do something about what's going on inside. None of y'all, all of y'all seem like very intelligent individuals. You have data, you have emails, you have pictures. There's no wonder you got a shortage of correctional officers. Who would want to work in an environment where if I go to work today, I could be that statistic? You have to clean up your house. Not specifically your house, but you have to clean up your house, or you're not going to attract. You're building a $1.4 billion new prison. How in the world are you going to equip it with personnel if you can't retain personnel that you got now? It looks like good money after bad, but please, y'all got to tell the classification system, uphold it. You cannot put aggressive, non-getting out of the prison system inmates in an open dormitory situation where there's inmates that has a chance. Christopher had gotten his GED. He had gotten clean. And he was getting ready. He was going to learn a trade and come out and go to work with me. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Thank you, sir. Michaela Martin, and up next will be Allison Molman. Okay, thank you. Michaela Martin, go ahead.
My name is actually Michaela Mount. That's my mom's last name.
Mount?
Mount.
Okay.
My father's name is Christopher Mount. In 2020, he went out for parole for the second time and was denied. His mental health declined, which led him to the situation that got him killed. He was put into a suicide unit at Easterling Correctional with another man on a Thursday who voiced to the COs, hey, you need to get him out of here before I kill him. And they thought it was funny. They didn't do anything about it. That Sunday, which was Mother's Day, he was snoring. Guy didn't like it, told him to hush. My dad replied with something kind of smart, to which the guy proceeded to stomp on my father, beat him to death, and then strangled him. Mind you, they were locked in the cell, and the guy's previous charge and what he was in there for was strangulation and murder. We weren't notified for 2 days after my father was killed. I didn't get to see my father for 10 years because I'm pretty young. The correctional system is not a great place for someone my age to be, from experience. And, you know, when you see your dad for the first time in 10 years and half of his face is almost gone because he was beaten, you know, it does something to you. And my father had served more than half of his sentence. He had a 30-year sentence. And he was killed. He could have gotten out. The parole, I've also forgot to mention that there was also supposed to be a CO watching them at all times, and they didn't. A CO actually walked by the cell after my dad was on the ground, laughed, and walked away. And my dad it took them 13 minutes to get back to him. He was already dead. But the thing is that they're putting these men in a locked cell together, and which, first of all, putting them in a suicide unit together, if you're not supposed to kill yourself, how are you going to kill someone else? So they're not supposed to be together. And I just think that the COs are corrupt. A lot of people talked about how these are our dads, these are our sons. I ask you to put yourself in the position to where if you have a son, daughter, anything like that, if you could think and imagine of hearing that they got brutally murdered. I after not being able to see them. I'm 17. My dad will never get to see me graduate, never get to see me get married, never get to see me graduate college, have kids, anything. That was taken from me. That was taken from my mother. The COs are corrupt. The prisons are corrupt, and it's in the name. It's a correctional, and they're meant for correction. It's not a death sentence. It's not supposed to be a death sentence, and it is. So many people are dying for no reason, and it's a correctional. I'm not naive. I know that people can change, and I know that people treat prison like, hey, I'm gonna be the biggest, baddest guy here, and I'm gonna kill a bunch of people. But some people do change, and it's meant for correction, and these officers aren't helping. The prisoners aren't helping. And I think that, I mean, I understand that it's hard to employ these people, but they are corrupt, and they are killing our families. So.
Thank you, Ms. Mount. Okay, next is Allison Molman. And then following her is Rebecca Crafton. Is Rebecca Crafton here? Are you Miss Crafton?
I'm speaking on behalf of Ms. Crafton. She's too emotional.
Okay. All right, Miss Allison Molman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Allison Molman, and I'm the interim legal director at the ACLU of Alabama. Our organization has historically spoken on behalf of incarcerated people, but as this committee is aware, prison safety is also about workplace safety. So I stand before you today because the Department of Corrections plans to use nitrogen at an execution scheduled for January 25th is a lethal threat to the staff at Holman and the public and must be stopped. In January 2021, a leak allowed nitrogen gas to fill a freezer room at a poultry plant in Gainesville, Georgia. The first 3 workers who walked into the freezer room immediately fell to the ground, suffocated, and died. Additional workers entered the freezer room, and 2 more workers fell to the ground, immediately suffocated, and died. A 6th worker died when they were pronounced dead at the hospital. And after 130 workers had to be evacuated, an additional 13 people, including 4 first responders in safety gear, required hospitalization and intensive care. The tragedy in Georgia is no outlier. Every year, the United States Chemical Safety Board has cited an average of 8 deaths and 5 serious injuries from nitrogen exposure. And what all of those other organizations and workplaces have by way of oversight, the Department of Corrections has none. In fact, there is no regulatory agency, OSHA isn't doing it, no regulatory agency is overseeing the use and storage of nitrogen at Holman Correctional Facility. History, science, and common sense tell us that we have a ticking time bomb at one of our prisons. The question isn't if nitrogen gas is going to kill ADOC staff, the question is when. But we still have time to prevent this tragedy. And that's why today we're urging state leaders. I understand that you're limited in what you can do outside of legislative session, but we're urging you to look at what's possible and what tragedies we have in front of us and to do something about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative England.
So I've done a little research on this. Does the state of Alabama notify the company that they purchased the chemicals from, what they're using them for?
They do not. The protocol specifically says that they do not inform those manufacturers. So there's some type of third party that is purchasing those materials for the state of Alabama.
Do we know how those chemicals are currently stored?
We do not. We've been given a redacted version of the protocol that provides little in the way of information about how they're using and how they're ensuring safety.
Do we know who, staffing-wise, is responsible for that?
We do not.
Do we know they're trained in how to deal with that?
My assumption, Representative England, is that there is no training on this.
I mean, considering we're first in something, that it's probably a fair assumption to say that the protocol is at least untested. So Also, the individual that's going to be executed is the same person that we, I guess, botched his execution before.
Yes, just this past year.
Yeah. And we've got a million issues within our criminal justice system, within our prison system. We've heard so far some gut-wrenching stories about failures within our system. It's just really interesting to me that the only thing that we could find an answer for is figure out another way to put somebody to death. That's really frustrating. So I hope that we can put some of this creativity that we apparently have for executions at work when we try to figure out how to deal with all the issues that are so far have been identified here that up until this point we have not had an answer for. And I would even venture to say that since the Department of Justice and the federal court system and so forth have all notified us of how bad our prison system is, we've actually gotten worse.
Yeah.
If I may, Representative England, I empathize with y'all. When this bill was first passed in Oklahoma, they were the first to pass a bill around nitrogen hypoxia. They had incomplete information, and that's part of why Oklahoma hasn't tried this method of execution. I don't think our legislators were provided complete information on the risks with this method, and so I really do empathize with y'all. I think we know a lot more today than we did when this was passed.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Molman. Okay, ma'am, on behalf of Rebecca Crafton, if you will state your name for us.
My name is Kelly Helton, and I'm speaking on behalf of Rebecca Crafton, whose son was brutally beaten November 6th.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if Barbara Ann Turner would come to the front, I'm sorry.
That's
okay. Miss Hilton, if you would, just go.
And we found out through not the prison, we found out through a fellow inmate that he was taken out of the prison by ambulance for 24 agonizing hours. You guys asked, did we contact the Department of Corrections? We did. We contacted the warden, the assistant warden, the chaplain, the Alabama Department of Corrections for 24 agonizing hours. Every 15 minutes, we were calling someone with no word on whether he was alive or whether he was dead. No word at all. When the warden finally decided to return a phone call, it was almost 24 hours later, and the answer that was given was, well, he's alive. Nothing else, nothing more, just that he was alive. And if he wasn't, the chaplain would have been calling her. He has had several brain surgeries. He's not being able to see out of an eye. He's having seizures because of his beating. But more importantly, the doctor at the hospital, at UAB Hospital, said that he needed intensive rehab. They put him right back into the same prison that he was beaten in. He did not stay in the infirmary. To this day, he still has not gotten any PT, any psychological help, nothing. The first time that Ms. Crafton got to talk to her son, it was like talking to a 2-year-old. And she still has no answers as of today. This is wrong. Ms. Crafton is his emergency contact. There's no reason that she should have not been notified of the condition of her son, the severity of her son's injuries. And for the warden to always be in a meeting or unavailable or whatever, that's wrong. It is her responsibility to care for the inmates in her care. And it's not happening. Alabama Departments of Correction did not help us get any information. They gave us one more person to call. No matter who we called, the answer was always the same. Only the warden can tell you. Only the warden. Well, that's no good when you can't get the warden on the phone. And then when she does call you back, she only calls you back because you've raised such a stink everywhere that you could possibly raise it. She's very defensive, very cold, and very short to the point. He's alive. Where is that okay? I implore you to think of your sons. If that was the answer after you knew he was taken out of hospital and severely beaten, would that be okay with you? Because I promise you it would not. It would not. There's rules for a reason. I implore you to look. Go to these prisons unannounced, because when you show up announced, they lock away what they don't want you to see, and they only let you see what they want you to see. Go unannounced. See what's happening. It's not okay. We treat these people like they do not matter. Well, I'm here to tell you they do matter. They matter to us, and they should matter to you as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hilton. Okay, up next is Barbara Ann Turner. And then following Ms. Turner is Kelly Helton.
I'm also here on behalf of Clifton Adam Bond.
Okay, hold on one second. You are who?
Barbara Ann Turner.
Okay. And is Miss Kelly Helton? Okay. All righty, Miss Turner, if you will go ahead.
As she was stating to you the circumstances around Adam, I was the one that received a call from a prisoner at 6 p.m. saying that he had been beaten and south-flighted out of there. I was the one that contacted his mother to tell her that a prisoner had called me and said that he was south-flighted, he was beaten with a pipe, he was stabbed all over his body. At that time, as again we called the prison.
Which facility was this?
Donaldson Correctional.
Okay, thank you.
I called the prison every hour that night. Please do a welfare check. Tell me something. Is it true? How do I know it's true? And they was call the warden, as she was telling you. The next morning at 8 o'clock, me and his mother were taking turns calling the warden in a meeting down the hall, And it was like 3:30 that evening. I'd been up 24 hours. I call a state senator, anybody that would talk to me and tell him this is unacceptable. We don't know if he's alive, if he's dead, if it's true. And the warden won't speak to us and no one there. They're rude to us. They're hateful to us. So finally, a senator got through to the prison, and she called me back and told me that someone from that prison would contact us, and they didn't give her a call back because that was unacceptable. I believe that was Senator Sewell's office. From there on, it was a nightmare for the next 12 to 13 days. We could only receive reports from the warden herself, and again, every day, she was in a meeting down the hall, unavailable. There was, in the reports that she gave, the first reports is that he was beaten, he was stabbed. She didn't tell us with the lead pipe. And it was just basic, like it wasn't nothing. It may have been nothing to her, but it was everything to us. The next update, 5 o'clock the next evening, she let it slip that he had brain surgery. She did not mean to tell us that. She let it slip. And now by the end, we're panicking. Brain surgery. We want to get to him. She would not allow us. She would not tell us what hospital he was at. She wouldn't tell us anything further than that. Every day goes on for 12 to 13 days. We're calling her. We're getting passed the buck to this one, to that one, to the nurse. And nobody, we were not allowed to talk to the medical doctors that was treating him. We were not allowed to talk to a nurse. We were not allowed to visit him at the hospital. We begged the warden, just please let us see him. We were not allowed to. We had no rights because he belonged to the state of Alabama. He may have done some things wrong, and he was there to serve his time. We understand that. But he did not deserve to be beaten with a lead pipe in his head, stabbed all over his body. And we as family, we should have rights. He may belong to the state of Alabama, but he also belongs to us. There needs something to be implemented with family rights. More than I want to say, I have a nephew, another nephew, Adam's my nephew. I have another nephew that I'm very proud of, as I am proud of Adam too, because he's a great guy. He serves in the U.S. Army, Special Forces. He goes in the third world countries. He'll call and say, hey, I'm gonna be in touch with you for a little while. We gotta go on a mission, I can't tell you about it. I worry more about the one in the Alabama State Penitentiary than I do in a third world country. Because he's got brothers beside him. He's got somebody that's gonna look over his back. In these prisons, Adam didn't have anybody look over his back. He didn't have a brother that was trained with him. He didn't have a guard to help him. The guards are not there. This is not the first time. They would not allow me to bring the pictures in for y'all to see of him beaten, even before this incident, how many times he's been beaten in there, and the guards are there. The problem is in the whole system. New prisons ain't gonna stop what happened to Adam. It's not. The same thing's gonna happen in your new prisons. Is something's gotta be reformed with these wardens, with the prison systems, with the guards. And you know, we're from South Alabama. We went through a whole lot of trauma with this. And he is just right down the road from us. Right now, right down the road. We're still not allowed to see him. This is heartbreaking. And if somebody's kid doesn't do something wrong and go to one of these places, they need to thank God. Get on their hands and knees and thank God. Because it could happen to anybody's child. Rich, poor, no matter who you are. And you don't want to be treated the way our family was treated and what has happened to Adam.
Thank you, Ms. Turner. Senator Singleton.
Yes.
Ms. Turner.
Ms. Turner, can you come back? Sure. You spoke of Donaldson. What was the time period that you're speaking of? Is this 2021?
April this year.
Okay, give me the time period that you're talking about.
April the 6th is the day it happened. From there, he was in hospital, 12, 13 days?
Okay.
And so that's the time period for that. He was returned back to Donaldson. We got a phone call from him. He was taken out of a trauma ICU unit back to Donaldson.
Okay. And put in med at Donaldson?
Yes, it was a medical infirmary there.
Okay.
We had a fit. And a lawyer had wrote a letter and got him transferred somewhere else where he was safe. The night he called us from Donaldson, he couldn't hardly speak because he had multiple strokes after the brain surgery. And he could say, it's not safe, not safe, guards, not safe.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Turner.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Ms. Kelly Helton, and then Latasha Williams. Is Latasha Williams here? Okay, Ms. Williams, if you will, come ahead and come to the front and just sit on the front row. There's several seats here on your left.
Again, I thank you for your time today.
Ms. Helton.
My name is Kelly Helton, and as you hear, I have loved ones that are incarcerated or have been incarcerated in the state of Alabama. And I implore you all to ask yourself this question. As you hear these family members speaking today of the violence going on in there, I ask you to think, where are the guards while this is happening? There's a young man that was held captive for 3 days and repeatedly raped. So my question is, when they did cell count, nobody noticed this inmate missing? Where are the guards? What are they doing? They're either looking the other way or they just don't care. And I need you to ask yourself that. Where are the people that we are paying to go into these prisons and protect and serve? Because they're not doing either. It is heartbreaking that we, as Alabama citizens, when our loved ones go into an Alabama prison, we pray every day that they do not come out in a body bag, because that's what's happening repeatedly. No one's looking. No one's listening. Your hands are not tied like ours are. Hear us. Hear what we're saying. Heed it. It's true. If you doubt it, just look. It's everywhere. It's not hidden anymore, yet it's getting ignored. We have the lowest parole rate ever. We're overcrowding our prisons, so we're putting all these people, 3 people to a one-man cell, and we're telling them, no matter how good you do while you're here, it's not gonna matter. You're gonna do day for day. We're putting them in a situation that there's no hope for them, none. And when you put that many people in a position that there's no hope, you have to ask yourself, what do you think is gonna happen? Especially when the people in charge are not looking, are not paying attention. Ask yourself how many deaths have been in Alabama prisons just this year. It's over 400. That's crazy. That is a question that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed right now, not tomorrow, not a week from now, but right now. Our family members are not safe, not even close to being safe. And we're treating them worse than we treat the animals that are in the Humane Society in the state of Alabama. And that is wrong. They are somebody's loved one. I'm asking you to look at this prison system. Look at it hard. Go unannounced. See what really is happening. Better yet, don't announce yourself when you call a prison and ask to speak to the warden. Don't announce who you are, just ask to speak to the warden and see how hard it is for you to speak to a warden. And then put yourself in these family members' places that you're trying to get information about your loved one, and you're getting met with that kind of resistance. It's not okay, guys. We need to do something, and it needs to be done today. Alabama has the worst prison system in the United States. And I don't know about you, but I vote for the state of Alabama. And that's not how I want Alabama to be remembered. That's not. Please do something. Listen to these families. Put yourself in these families' shoes. And remember, these people that they're speaking about are our loved ones, and they do matter.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Latasha Williams, and then next up will be Tarina Jordy. Tarina Jordy. Okay. Next would be Beth Shelburne. Okay. All right, Ms. Williams.
As he stated, my name is Latasha Williams, and my son is currently incarcerated at Limestone Correctional Facility. The issue, well, he's had everything happen to him but be killed. Standing up here before you just reminds me of going before the parole board, because they sit there, they listen to you. Some of them even smile, and then they deny you. And it's just the emotions that they go through because they have to in order to say that they've done the job of going before parole. My son was raped in February of this year, and it took them over a month to get him moved. I contacted everybody from—
Can you state the facility he was in?
He was at Donaldson Correctional Facility when he was raped, and they moved him to Bullock. I contacted the prison, I contacted the senator, I contacted the ACLU, and I had some help from Miss Allison here. And once he got moved, he was at Bullock for maybe a few weeks, and then some of the inmates that raped him were there at the prison. So he has spent a lot of time fighting and defending himself, but he's only going to get written up for defending himself, and then that will have an effect on him when he comes up for parole again. He was also at Fountain in 2020. He was working for a warden named Mary Cook. He was painting for her, and he had a knife on him. He says he's not going to be in any institution without a knife because he has to defend himself on a daily. The knife fell out of his pocket, and he ran to get rid of the knife, and Mary Cook, the warden, asked him, what did he have? So he said he'd rather get written up for the disciplinary of just being disobedient than to get caught with the knife. But she wrote him up and charged him with an assault on her, and he never did touch her. I reached out to Mary Cook, and I wrote her a letter, and it probably wasn't even 2 months later, she quit the job. So when he went up for parole, and they told me I had the 3 minutes to speak, I said, I want to speak on the assault that he was charged with, because when I called to speak to the warden at Donaldson, where he was sent after that, they told me, they said he brushed past Miss Cook. So I said, that's detrimental to his parole hearing. You know, he's going to be denied. So when he comes up for parole, and I speak to the lady who describes how the process is going to go through the parole board, she says, I want to speak to you in the back. She said, I want you to be careful what you say about Mary Cook, because I'm not sure of her name, but the female on the parole board, she said, that's her best friend. So be careful what you say, because it's going to look bad for your son. So people are telling me these things about people who are in high positions who have control over your loved one, which is my son in the case, or anybody else getting out, and they're putting hits. You have officers putting hits out on him. He's had a hit put out on him for $100. These people are from the city that we're from. I had to close my business because they threatened me, because they know I make cash money, and they know where I live, because it's just that small, and people talk. So you have these things flowing outside of the prison that have affected my lifestyle, my job, and my business, and it's affecting my son. No matter where he goes, they make the phone calls to wherever he's at to let them know he's there so they can start the extortion and assaulting him again. He's been stabbed over 60 times, and 35 of those were probably from October of last year up until now. He's had his ear severed. He's had his finger severed. He has been sewed up by inmates because he cannot get to the infirmary. I told him that he had asthma when he first went into the prison because they wanted to know all the medical issues. During the shutdown that started in October of last year, he had to pay somebody for a breathing treatment that had access to a nebulizer every time he needed a breathing treatment. So I'm paying $25 per breathing treatment. Sometimes they would let him get 3 for $50, but it's like, why should I have to pay? If the state of Alabama is in charge of his health, why should I have to pay somebody else outside? They have PlayStations, they have chainsaws, they have every weapon, lethal weapon inside of these prisons. The pictures are on social media. They're exposing all this stuff, and still nothing is being done about it. I'm frustrated and I'm fed up.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. We appreciate you being here. Representative England. I'm going to, because I want to make sure we understand that everybody hears this. Have you spoken with anybody at the Department of Corrections about what's going on with your son?
Yes, I have.
Can you describe the response that you've gotten from them?
They don't really care if he doesn't give a name, but if he tells anybody any names, he's putting himself in harm's way.
So what have they done?
They didn't move him. He stayed at Bullock until he was recently transferred because he got into it with an inmate and he defended himself. So now he's at Limestone in close custody.
As far as, and you mentioned about his health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe the Department of Corrections response to the health issues that he has?
They didn't, he said he was never able to get to the infirmary because there was so much insurrection going on during the time of the shutdown, but he ended up being hospitalized for pneumonia. It got that bad.
And I don't want you to identify where he is, but how many facilities has he been in to this point?
Oh, God. At least 6 to 7 because a few of them he's been to more than once.
And he's never been able to escape the violence and lack of supervision, lack of employees, lack of order or anything, or
No.
You've never been able to escape it.
No, and he says he can't tell. It's like he can't tell certain people because they're in with the inmates. They're all an organization. It's an inside organization.
And inside organization also meaning the COs, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And last thing, you described your experience before the parole board. So one of the employees actually pulled you aside and told you that the likelihood, if you mention this person's name, the likelihood that you would even get a fair hearing won't happen.
Right.
Yeah. And you said you had how long before the parole board?
3 minutes.
And any questions asked of you?
Well, they only wanted to know a home plan. So I described my home plan, but the time went by so fast. I did ask for additional time to speak on the subject of the warden and my son, and they just listened to me. But they also had him not showing up for court and a warrant out for his arrest, and he's already incarcerated. So he was in their care.
Yeah. I'm assuming he was denied.
Yes.
How long was he set off?
He has a 20-year sentence for an armed robbery.
So 5 years?
No priors. He was 17 at the time. He had a co-defendant, and he actually didn't. He took marijuana from the victims, but they stated that he took money. I had a reporter contact me, and she asked me what my son did, and I told her, and she said, I thought it was odd because there's no amount of money down on record that he took from these people. He admitted to what he did, but there was no investigation. It's not like this works like Law and Order. Nobody's going in to question what's going on with the people who are actually making the accusations. He's just charged because he's black, for one thing, but he didn't have a chance for youthful offender. It was his first offense, and he has a 20-year sentence, and he has to be around other violent criminals who have life. He doesn't have a problem with doing his time. He just needs to do his time and not be assaulted and have a chance for rehabilitation, to take the classes he needs, to get the medical attention he needs. That's what we're asking for, fair treatment.
Thank you.
Watch what God will do.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Beth Shelburne, and then after Ms. Shelburne is Edward Friend. Edward Friend. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Ms. Shelburne.
Good afternoon to all of you.
Good afternoon.
My name is Beth Shelburne. I'm a journalist and writer, and I've been covering the crisis that's going on inside our prison system for well over a decade now. I recognize that we're all getting a chance to speak because of the efforts made to increase transparency when it comes to the Department of Corrections with the recent bill that was passed, but transparency is still a major issue inside ADOC. When someone dies under unusual circumstances inside an Alabama prison, like a murder or an overdose or a suicide, which sadly, as we've heard, are not really that unusual anymore, the agency used to issue a press release with all of the information about the death that was available to all of the media. That's how it went in 2012 when I began reporting on ADOC. I worked for WBRC in Birmingham at the time. Now, when someone dies in custody under these circumstances and reporters like me reach out to the Public Information Office in the central office of ADOC, we may or may not get a response. And as you've heard, it's not just people like me and the other members of the media that are here that may or may not get a response. Sometimes the next of kin of the deceased get no response. They are met with contempt and silence. So I know from my reporting that when a person dies in the custody of law enforcement, and that includes a prison, ADOC is the largest law enforcement agency in our state. That information about that death is in the public interest, and it is public information. It falls under Alabama's open records law. So why is this information being treated like a state secret? Why is the agency not answering questions from myself and other members of the media and from family members that want to know if their son is alive or dead? I know that the agency is releasing some information about death investigations in the quarterly reports that it's required by law now to submit to you all and to put on its website. But you may have noticed that information is not synthesized. It is raw material, missing some key information, and it's really hard to get an idea of the bigger picture in looking at these quarterly reports because of the way that they're putting the information out as just raw information. I write about these issues and study them all the time, and it's hard for me to make sense of. So I can imagine, ordinary citizens that don't look at this stuff all day would have a hard time making sense of it. I really question whether or not it is being put out in an intentionally confusing way. This information is important. Why? Because it belongs to the public. It's not a state secret. And our prisons have the highest mortality rate in the nation. We have record homicides and suicides and an epidemic of fatal overdoses. People are overdosing on illegal substances inside maximum security prisons run by the largest law enforcement agency in the state. Just think about that for a second. It shouldn't just be a given that drugs are in prison. We shouldn't just accept that. At the very least, this agency should be forced to develop a protocol to inform family members about the deaths of their loved ones in a timely way and the next steps after that, instead of being met with silence or hostility. This is really unacceptable and shameful. The bare minimum, they should be forced to develop a protocol. That does not cost $1 billion to build a new mega prison, and it certainly doesn't cost $20 million in legal services. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shelburne. Representative England. Ms. Shelburne.
You mentioned something else. There's been over the last 2 months, 3 months, I've been made aware of, and I think we all have, the deaths that are occurring in ADOC custody. That the family members, we've had issues with family members being notified. I know of one situation where someone was buried in a pauper's grave before the family was notified, but also I've seen several stories that have alluded to deaths that have occurred in questionable circumstances, and the autopsies that are done as a result of those. Let's just say the families are receiving the bodies in conditions that further rise to the increased level of suspicion about what's going on. And I meant to ask Ms. Farino about that earlier, but I'll have to talk to you about that, because there has to be something done I mean, even, you know, what we like to do is label people so we'll feel comfortable treating them less than human. And calling someone an inmate or whatever makes it easier for us to deal with the tragic circumstances of their death, right? So it also means that the family's treated with less dignity, because as we transmit or transport that body from ADOC custody to the family's custody, if we didn't really if we really weren't concerned about them while they were alive, we're certainly not concerned about them when they're deceased. We're also certainly not concerned about them without their families. But there has to be a way where we force the Department of Corrections in that transition to preserve those bodies. So in the event that there are suspicious circumstances around their death, the family's even able to conduct an autopsy to get a better idea of what happened to their loved one. Because, you know, regardless of the circumstances, and we get so desensitized because they're so regular, the suicides, the homicides, the assaults, the drugs, the corruption, everything seems to be so regular that we get to the point where we're desensitized to it. But, you know, there has to be some integrity and dignity to life where we respect it to the point that even in death, we respect that person's transition to their family. So we've got to do something. So even when something unfortunate like that happens, that we're able to at least have the puzzle pieces after the fact to determine what happened to that person while they're incarcerated. And a lot of the stories that you've told us through your stories, whether, you know, with Mr. Johnson and many others, the only reason that we know isn't because the Department of Corrections told us, it's because other inmates have told us, or third parties have told us, and that's just not how this is supposed to work.
Well, one thing I've noticed covering ADOC for longer than a decade and doing a lot of really critical reporting on this agency and the problems inside it is it's always one step forward, 10 steps back. I mean, you got this bill passed that requires transparency. We're all here because of that. Is anybody from ADOC here? I thought that they were supposed to be here, but I don't see them. But with these quarterly reports that they're putting out, they have since taken the death data out of their monthly statistical reports. So we're actually getting less information about deaths now than we were before they were issuing quarterly reports. They used to have a data point for every single facility on how many people died in that facility every month. That's gone. Poof. Just like staffing levels. Poof, it's gone. They just take it out of the monthly statistical reports. Staff on inmate assaults, gone. We never see those. Like they don't exist, and they do. We know they do. And these deaths exist every day. And we are reporting the ones that we hear about. What about the ones that we don't hear about? Is ADOC going to issue a press advisory about those? No.
I want to assure you that it's one of the purposes of this public hearing. And all the information that you've shared, I can work on using the framework that we've already passed that created this opportunity to require more transparency of the Department of Corrections. It's one of the, I don't really mix words, and the longer the day goes, the more emotion, the rawer my emotions get. It's the worst run department that we've got, with the most jeopardy attached to it. At the very least, knowing those circumstances, I think the very least as a legislature and as this committee, we owe the public as much transparency about what they're doing as possible. Because the only way to, they say it all the time, is the best disinfectant is sunlight. I'll pledge to you that, going forward, we'll work on at least taking a look at the statute to see if we can increase the mandatory disclosures that the Department of Corrections should make, because at the very least, none of this is hidden information. This is all public. Nothing should be secret. And the only way we can have any hope of improving the conditions is to have the information necessary to do it.
Right.
Thank you, Ms. Shelburne.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Mr. Edward Friend. Following Mr. Friend is Christina Horvat. Christina, okay. Mr. Friend.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for being on this committee, you and your colleagues. I cannot imagine a more challenging assignment. This has been maybe the most heart-wrenching 90 minutes that I have spent. I first became aware of prisons back in the problems of the prisons back in 1976. And as you know, that year, Judge Frank Johnson issued an order describing the just horrid, unconstitutional violations in our prisons. It was a nightmarish litany of Eighth Amendment violations, assaults, sexual abuses, overcrowding, understaffing. He placed the system under federal supervision for 13 years, and he appointed a committee to oversee and monitor the state's implementation of his order. My father was a member of that 1976 committee. Dad was a toughened veteran of World War II. He witnessed unspeakable horror. He landed at Normandy, and he was shocked to the core with the pervasive cruelty and violence in Alabama prisons. Let's face it, I feel it's 1976 again, but worse. I mean, listening to these statements today, and I cannot match their eloquence, the prisons are a moral outrage. The newspaper headlines are screaming with us about atrocities, inmate assaults up 41% in 1 year. And I heard one speaker say that our homicide rate is 5 times the national average. It is shocking, and I'm shocked to the core, and my friends and colleagues are shocked to the core that the Department of Justice, based on a mountain of evidence, declares that corrections are, quote, deliberately indifference to the violence and the suffering that permeates our prisons. Some 30 years ago, and I'm by far your oldest speaker, some 30 years ago, I was chairman of the Birmingham Area Chamber of Commerce. And I'm removed from business now, but making the rounds, I hear with some frequency from my business colleagues that they believe things in the prisons are totally out of fiscal control. They can't understand why this legislature, cannot pass a second look piece of legislation for these prisoners that have languished in our prisons for 20, 30, 40 years and who did not commit a violent crime. Why in the world can't you remand those prisoners to a trial judge, have him re-examine those sentences with the option to go ahead and reduce it or not? That's not being soft on crime, that's being smart on crime. There are two things that I wanted to talk about. I prepared some really detailed testimony. I urge you in the strongest of terms to save money for your constituents. We're paying $1 billion for a 4-year contract to put in jail some people who are on dialysis, who are walking around with canes, who are in wheelchairs. Let's let Medicare or other sources pick up the tab and not put that on the back of the Alabama taxpayers. I urge you to act with urgency. It's been 4 years since Judge Lyons called for us to act immediately. Second thing, please take a look at the Texas experience. And I'm going to email you my testimony, which is way too lengthy.
Yeah, please do.
Texas, as I'm sure you know, turned to community alternatives. They took nonviolent people, and what do? They created substance abuse beds outside of the prison system. They created reentry houses. They had an increase in substance abuse within the prisons. And did it work? In 10 years, crime goes down 26%. 26%, and they save $2 billion. That's fiscal conservatism, which we simply don't have in the prison system in the state of Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Friend.
All I can say, thank you. We Alabamian people, we're much better than that, and we very much look forward to you acting in the next session of our legislature.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you being here today. Next speaker is Christina Horvat. Horvat, okay. And then after Ms. Horvat will be Deborah Jackson. Is Deborah Jackson here? Okay. So then the next speaker will be Yolanda Flowers? Yolanda, I'm missing an A here. Okay, Yolanda Flowers. Okay, Ms. Horvat.
My name is Christina Horvat. I am a representative from both sides of the wall organization. I also have a loved one incarcerated. My husband was stabbed at Staten Correctional Facility last year. And I had this whole planned speech, of course, but everybody's already covered everything, so you guys know what's going on. But our issue is how much more do we have to push it before ADOC has all these rights and the power, but they don't have any responsibilities. They want all of our loved ones to be held accountable, but nobody holds them accountable for it at all. They're not here for us to hold them accountable. The cell phones, we're aware they're contraband, but without these cell phones, we wouldn't be aware of half the stuff that's going on inside these walls. And they're not concerned with what's going on behind the walls. They're concerned to go send a CERT team to go raid the whole dorm because a cell phone video got leaked. So you're in there assaulting incarcerated people. You're in there moving all their stuff. People are just ransacking everything because you want to find who put that video out there instead of finding out where the problem was to begin with. So ADOC always wants somebody else to take the blame for everything. It's time that they took the blame and their responsibility. Your incentive good time was taken away because of an ADOC mistake. How is it responsible when they messed up on someone else's record? You let somebody out of prison before they were ready to come out of prison. They were at work release. They escaped work release. Therefore, that person should have been taken off of the list for any incentive good time. But instead, you cancel the whole state's incentive good time. You are breeding anger. Parole board needs an oversight committee as well. Just as everybody always has somebody above them to hold them responsible, hold them accountable. We, the people of Alabama, have got to make a change, and that is why so many of us have decided to take on political roles ourselves. Because we're sick of it. We're sick of the corruption. We're sick of not being answered. And I love the fact, I would love for you to get on the phone right now, on speaker, call any facility in any ADOC facility and ask for a warden. You have 3 wardens at a facility and you can't get one of them on the phone. You get 1, 2, or 3. They're always busy. They're always out. And matter of fact, as you go to visit, they can walk through any single metal detector. They're never checked. Your guards are never checked. They're getting caught because they're getting told on. Everybody in these facilities have to be held accountable. Everybody. And the money's there according to everybody else. The money's being put in the wrong places. Hire outside people to investigate. Hire outside people to do security for your inmates, the guards, and everybody that comes in and out of those doors. And like y'all said, work release. Y'all have no problem let them work state houses and doing yard work for the mansion outside and doing everything. And they're around society every day. But yet, they're a risk for getting out. It's a lot. It angers us all, and we're tired of it. And we are begging you, we're asking you, and everybody in this room can agree. How much more is it going to take before something is done right now before one of y'all's family members are in there or they're dead? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Horvat. Next is Ms. Yolanda Flowers.
Yes.
Ms. Flowers.
Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for allowing all of us to come before you and speak on behalf of our incarcerated citizens. I do not have an incarcerated loved one. but I'm Yolanda Flowers, and I ran as governor in our 2022 election. And my desire has always been, as part of my platform, was the justice system and how corrupt it is, the prison system and all these things. Martin Luther King Jr. was a prominent civil rights leader who advocated for nonviolent resistance against racial oppression, inequality, and injustice. He was also a critic of the prison system, which he saw as a tool for maintaining white supremacy and exploiting black labor. While he was locked up in the Birmingham City Jail, and that's where I'm from, Birmingham, he wrote a letter. In his letter, he addressed the criticisms of some white clergymen who urged him to abandon his direct action and pursue legal channels instead. He argued that civil disobedience was a moral duty in the face of unjust laws. In other words, he argued that we citizens have a legitimate right to stand up against legitimate government, and that waiting for gradual change was not an option for the oppressed. He also denounced the harsh conditions and brutality that he and other black prisoners faced in jail, and he called for an end to mass incarceration and racial discrimination in the criminal justice system here in Alabama and across the country. Now, how did the prison change after his letter? The prison system here in the United States did not change significantly after King's letter. In fact, it increased 500% over the last 40 years. As the gentleman said, it's kind of like going back to, it's worse than 1976. But despite his powerful arguments and his appeals, it was ignored. The United States prison population has increased dramatically since the 1960s, especially among Black and Latino people who are disproportionately incarcerated and subjected to harsher sentences, as our representative here alluded to, than white people. Many scholars and activists have criticized the United States prison system and Alabama system as a form of racialized social control and continuation of slavery and Jim Crow laws. Some of the factors that have contributed to the growth and persistence of mass incarceration in the United States include the war on drugs, mandatory minimum sentences, the privatization of prisons, and the lack of adequate rehabilitation and reentry programs for prisoners. Several mothers have talked about this. However, there have also been some efforts, we're going to say, to reform the prison system and address the racial disparities and injustices that King himself denounced in his letter. Some of these efforts include the abolitionist movement, which calls for the dismantling of the prison industrial complex and the creation of alternative forms of justice and accountability. The restorative justice movement, which focuses on healing the harm caused by crime and fostering dialogue and reconciliation among victims, offenders, and communities. And the decarceration movement, which advocates for reducing the number of people in prison and expanding the use of alternatives to incarceration, such as diversion programs, community supervision, and treatment services.
Flowers, you have about 10 seconds if you wrap up.
Good. These movements are inspired by him, but it has failed on the ears of Alabama system. I have a fear. I really do have a fear. Although this prison oversight committee or the bill has been passed, but my fear is, are you going to stand? Are you going to stand? King says that the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. So I ask, please listen to our citizens. Please listen to us. My heart is bleeding every day I'm in prayer. Sitting here listening to some of the mothers talk, I've been crying. So I'm asking that you all please push this and please stand, fight with every ounce that you have on behalf of our incarcerated loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Flowers. Well, we have gone through the list just short of 2 hours here. First of all, I want to thank everyone that was here today, everyone that spoke, those who couldn't speak, and some spoke for you, some that weren't even able to come because of the emotion and that sort of thing. But we do appreciate you telling us these things. They're not easy, as you know better than we do. But we appreciate you all being here today. Is there any comment from the committee before we adjourn?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Singleton.
Ms. Flowers, I want to thank you for your compassion that you just brought. I watched you as you proceeded across the state, running for governor of the state, and you were very consistent with your statements that you've made on your campaign trail. As we move down this line to look at how do we better this system, I think that when we talk about building new facilities, a lot of people accuse us of trying to open up more doors to incarcerate more people into new facilities, but at the end of the day, we're still overcrowded. We're really and truly still overcrowded. We have not, I mean, being what is proposed right now to build new facilities is not enough beds to be able to deal with it. And I know from day to day as we walk through this piece, we're looking at trying to provide safety for not only inmates, but for those correctional officers who walk in every day to do their jobs, that are citizens who have to go home to their families. So as we go through this on a day-to-day basis, there are things that are happening overnight that we don't know what's happening as members of this legislative body. And we do address this, and we're only in session so many days of the year that we can actually address it to where it becomes a matter, something that we can do something about. If you would come back to the mic and suggest to us, Mr. Chairman, what are you proposing on behalf of these families? And I heard from all these family members, and I'm one of those who fight for the rights of inmates on a daily basis. I visit just about every one of these facilities. In the new construction, I go out to the construction sites, making sure that we are building what we say we're going to build, and making sure that it is done right. What are you suggesting that we do? And I heard you talk about new programs like drug courts and other things instead of just locking folks up. What do you suggest that we do? What are some of your remedies?
Thank you, Representative Singleton. During my platform when I ran, one of the things that I suggested, well, several, because of the system is so corrupt, one thing for the officers, that they will be given a psychological evaluation. We need to have those who are of good report, who are honest, would not take bribes, would not be the conduits of allowing drugs and all types of paraphernalia of what will come in, that they will take a psychological evaluation. I also suggested that there will be cameras placed in all of the facilities, and this is for every facility. Another thing I suggested was that the Pardons and Parole Board also would be more diverse. They too should have a psychological evaluation. Don't put people in that are friends with somebody else because they know Pookie or they know Bobby Joe or whomever, but put them in and make it diverse. How do you make it diverse? Choose someone that is community-minded, a president of a community, a nurse or a doctor. Yes, a police officer. We need to have more than 3. We need at least have 5 on the parole and pardons board. Another thing I suggested was that upon our citizens, incarcerated citizens leaving, that there would be a rehabilitation platform set up for them to where they will leave the prison and go to a place, dormitory, to where they will be able to work. They will learn their job skills. They learn how to interview, how to properly dress, and they can also, like I said, learn certain skills. So once they are released into the society, that they will be productive citizens. On this board, I call it a Justice League board. Okay, the Justice League will have a lawyer, former judge, we'll have social workers, we'll have a vocational rehabilitation counselors, so that because what most people don't realize, prisoners, I'm going to say prisoners, they have a disability. It's not because they've been stabbed or beaten to death, almost, but because society is not willing to accept them when they are released. The first thing they'll say, an employer will say, I can't hire you because you have a felon. Okay? That's when the vocational rehabilitation counselors will come in and they will advocate for that individual. That's a disability. Okay? So all of these entities and the Justice League will be over the parole board to make sure that the parole and pardons board, that they are doing what they're supposed to do according to law, and not allowing some other outside interests or groups come in and say, no, I don't think that person needs to be released. You know, they are in favor for the families, whoever. But everyone, just like you and I, we are here because of the grace of God. And if we cannot impart grace to people who have stumbled, none of us are without sin. None of us are without it. We have all come short of the glory of God. If God can give us favor, if he can pardon us, certainly those in legislature can pardon. You understand what I'm saying? So those are the things that I have pushed for.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Representative Simpson. Representative Hill. Representative England.
Just real quick, I'm not sure about the Justice League. It's an interesting concept, but I for years have offered, and many others much smarter than I have offered remedies and some solutions to some of these problems. As far as oversight is concerned, I will, once again, I'm offering legislation this session to create an oversight, temporary oversight board for the Pardons and Parole Board, because I think that the recommendations and the guidelines need to be presumptive. And if not followed, then the board needs to be able to provide a reason to the applicant as to why their application failed, besides what they did 20 years ago, or that they're quote unquote a threat to public safety, which I think we all know what that means now. Also, as far as the second chance legislation is concerned, I will introduce or reintroduce legislation that responsibly and reasonably identifies a population within our prison system that is serving life without parole, that is there not because of what they did, but because of when they were convicted. Because we have determined over the years that certain offenses should be violent, some are nonviolent, but the people who have been sentenced under schemes that are no longer legal or used should get the benefit of resentencing when they wouldn't have been sentenced to life without parole, but for the time they were convicted. And ultimately, I do know that one of the answers that we've always given is that we're getting ready to build a new prison. But But nobody's ever given us any answers of what we're going to do until we get to that prison. It's going to take us a few years. And it appears that we have decided that it doesn't matter what happens between now and then. But I caution us because I believe that we're going to build new prisons and just put old problems in them, which means that the abuse will continue, the corruption will continue, the death, the despair, and the inhumanity, unless we have a fundamental change in how we approach this problem. And listen, over the course of the last 40 years, you could probably go from headline in 1976 that says the exact same thing that it says about our prison system today in 2023. If we all had the same creativity, intestinal fortitude, and ingenuity it takes to figure out another way to execute somebody that we do to protect our citizens that we're incarcerated, I'm pretty sure we can fix this problem. But we don't. Because the sad thing is, in a state that says that life matters, the easiest thing for us to figure out how to do is to kill somebody. So if we're quite honestly going to do anything about our prison system, it's going to have to start with reevaluating how we feel about life. And when I say life, I don't mean in terms of I feel better because I can watch somebody die because they're an inmate and they deserve what they get, or I feel better because I can sleep at night because this person committed a crime or made a mistake in their past, so I really don't care what happens to them. Clearly that approach isn't working. And if incarcerating people for a very long time was an effective way to deal with our problem, we would be the safest place on earth. So I implore you as citizens to keep putting pressure on us. And I implore my members of the legislature here and of the body to use the same fortitude, creativity, ingenuity that we put into killing people as we do in making sure they can survive our prison system. So I look forward to having this dialogue and the session begins, and hopefully we can figure out a way to help. And last thing, thank you for coming. I know this wasn't easy. One of the hardest things to do is to describe tragedy in your life in front of a bunch of strangers. And one thing that you said that's really sticking with me right now, it's hurting me, is that when you said that you feel like this is being in front of the parole board. And I'll assure you that it's not, because what you said to me has changed me, and I'm pretty sure it's had an impact on everybody on this board to the point where I'm going to continue to be motivated to do whatever I can to help. So, thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we appreciate everybody being here again and all the input, and we are adjourned.